I want to introduce to you today Dr. John McDougall. I'm one of those people, probably there are several of you out there, who has what we call McDougall stories. And my story is, 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with an incurable autoimmune disease. I had been vegetarian for 6 years, and of course, I'm a vegetarian, I have my diet wired, right? So I was diagnosed while I was pregnant, and basically this disease is potentially fatal, it's disfiguring, it's called relapsing polychondritis, and what happens is that the cartilage in your body is chewed up. Your body doesn't recognize it as being part of your body, and it starts to burn it away. It's very painful, and of course you have cartilage throughout your whole body, so just imagine once it gets into your heart, you're pretty much down for the count. So I was pretty naive about the disease when I was first diagnosed, and my doctor told me basically that he could teach me to live with it. Oh. Now, living with the disease means taking doses of prednisone, which is a steroid. Prednisone has its own dangerous side effects, including blindness and severe headaches. So to me, that didn't really seem like living, and especially having 3 young children, one of them a baby, 2 of them twins who were only 2 years old at the time. I really didn't feel like I could function like I needed to as a wife and a mother and a writer and all the other millions of things that we do daily. So a year and a half into this disease, I started doing my own research. Unfortunately, the research I did made me see that the disease was even worse than I knew it was when I was first diagnosed. So that really made me want to get rid of this thing, and I was basically ready to try anything. 2 years earlier, my sister had given me Dr. McDougall's 12-day program. Well, being a vegetarian, I had a lot of vegetarian books. My friends and family liked to give me vegetarian books for my birthday and Christmas. So I had put it up on the shelf and hadn't really looked at it. Well, one day I did look at it, and he mentioned autoimmune diseases. And the disease I had is in the lupus family, and he talked about lupus. And he mentioned a connection between dairy products and lupus. Well, with someone who basically didn't have any other options, I decided to cut out dairy. I was already a vegetarian, so it's not like I really had to go very far with what Dr. McDougall was recommending. So 3 weeks after I did this, we became vegans instantly, by the way. The minute I read that book, I came to my husband and I said, "We're vegans now." So his reaction was, "Okay, now we're vegan. I control the food." So 3 weeks after I started on Dr. McDougall's diet, I went into my doctor, and the indicators that the disease were active, the disease is active, were not there any longer. So this was a fairly shocking development. Also that my cholesterol had dropped from 265 to 130. So to me that was, this is in 3 weeks, mind you. I had been tested monthly for this disease. So my doctor said to me in his clipped Oxford accent, "Your dietary strategies are paying off." Which I really appreciated. I was tested for about 3 months after that, monthly, and nothing. So for 5 years now, I am in remission, and I owe this to Dr. McDougall. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. McDougall, and this is where I'm going to start reading, because I don't have all his statistics memorized. He received his degree in medicine from Michigan State University, College of Human Medicine. He received his postgraduate training from the University of Hawaii Medical Residency Program, and is certified by the National Board of Medical Examiners and the American Board of Internal Medicine. He has been in private practice for over 25 years and is currently medical director of the McDougall program at St. Helena Hospital and Health Center in Napa Valley, California. And this is where I do a plug. Dr. McDougall's work in the field of medicine is focused on the prevention and treatment of disease, which is much better than just living with the disease and taking drugs. Through the use of proper diet and lifestyle, he has helped shape current trends by his important research and leadership. He has published much research on the beneficial effects of diet on victims of breast cancer. He writes a monthly column for Vegetarian Times and on VegSource when we can get him, and is a frequent lecturer and talk show guest. He has a nationally syndicated television show as well as a weekly radio show. He has authored many books and articles, including The McDougall Plan, Dr. McDougall's Medicine, A Challenging Second Opinion, The McDougall Program, the McDougall Program for a Healthy Heart, as well as McDougall cookbooks. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. John McDougall.
The whole diet is something I've been involved in for 25, 30 years. And I'll tell you, about 10 years ago, I was absolutely convinced that the world was on the right track. The evidence was overwhelming. It had been researched in every country in the world, and the conclusions were all the same. And that is, a plant-based diet was what the human being was supposed to live on. So I never anticipated the insanity that was going to occur over the last 10 years. Of course, I never anticipated that somebody could invent a .com name and become a millionaire the next day either. In fact, I think that's part of the problem. We just went through a decade where everything was so easy. Overnight riches. We could eat anything and everything we wanted. We didn't have to worry about our health insurance. That's all changed, hasn't it? It's all changed in a big way. Now, I anticipate over the next 5 to 10 years that people will be listening. They'll be concerned about their health. They'll be concerned about the money that they spend on health insurance and health care. They'll be concerned about whether or not they're employable because of their health and their personal appearance. I think we're coming into a new age, and I believe that we all have an opportunity, an obligation to go out and tell the world about the message that we have, about how to get physical strength and mental clarity, and to stay healthy and young-looking for a lifetime, because the world wants to know it. Maybe they didn't know it the last 10 years, but I think they want to know it now, and so it's time for us to go out and really extend our mission. Let me tell you about the insanity. The insanity was the high-protein diets, and I say was because, as far as I'm concerned, they're done. But they did something I never thought could happen. They captured the attention of the American public in a big way. And here are some of the books that you're familiar with: Atkins and the Hellers, the Carbohydrate Addicts Diet, and the Zone, and the Sugar Busters, Protein Power. And that's what it's all been about for the last 10 years. And I'm sure many of you have had the same problem I've had. How could, in the face of good science, something like this could have happened? Next slide. Well, I want to point out to you, in that period of time that they ruled high-protein diets in the bookstores, they ruled, we see a change in obesity that's frightening in this country. The programs don't work. Obesity went from 12% in 1991 to 18% in 1998, and went up for another percent in 1999. There's every reason to believe that in 2001, 21% of people in this country are obese. To be obese, you have to be carrying around another half a person. If you're just talking about being too fat to be in good health, we have research from Tufts University that tells us that 63% of men in this country are too fat. And 55% of women in this country are overweight for their health. This is an epidemic. And it has not been answered by high-protein diets, but we can help the world answer this question. And we can also help our friends who have been misguided by the message of these high-protein diets. And I'd like to share with you some of the things that I know about high-protein diets and share with you what I know to be the truth. Next slide. All high-protein diet books are based upon the same thing. And they tell us that the reason people are fat is because of insulin. Insulin is a hormone made by the pancreas. The job of insulin is to cause all the calorie-giving substances that you eat to be distributed in the body. So that when you eat, insulin goes to your cells, it opens up the cell walls and lets the sugar come into the cells so the machinery can be run and energy can be derived. Insulin takes fat and pushes the fat that you just ate into your fat cells for later use. And it causes the body to synthesize protein. That's the job of insulin. So logically, these people say that the reason everybody's fat in this country is because they have too much insulin in their body. They make too much insulin after they eat. And so it forces too much fat into those fat cells. And there's a little bit of truth to that, a little science to back it up. But just a little bit. And they really don't bother to look at the real science. They don't care. And I've pointed this out to them in many debates, many discussions, showed them the literature, showed them the truth, and they continue to lie to the public. The only reason I can think they continue to do it is it's profitable, and the public continues to listen. So let's look at the truth of the situation. Let's look at insulin, that hormone that is released after we eat, and look at some of the foods and the response that they have in terms of insulin. Now, what they tell us is that the worst thing to eat is carbohydrate. Because carbohydrate makes the insulin go so high. And instead, what we ought to eat is a lot of protein. Fat's okay too. We shouldn't be eating breads and pastas and porridges. Instead, we should be eating chicken and fish and beef. That's how we get the insulin down. That's their message in every one of their books. So let's look at the research. Next slide. This is research out of the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. This is the landmark study, the classic study. If you want to look it up, you can refer to this study to anybody who's interested in the science. What they did is they looked at subjects, they fed them various foods, and they looked at the response that occurred as far as their insulin production in their blood. And so when they compared brown rice to beef, they found beef produced more insulin than brown rice. Next slide. And when they fed white pasta and compared it to cheese, they found cheese produced more insulin than white pasta. Next slide. And then they compared porridge to fish. Same story. More insulin production from these high protein, high fat foods than the carbohydrates that they condemn. But they don't really care about the science. Next slide. We're going to be talking about Barry Sears in the Zone. I hope you're familiar with that diet. We'll be talking about that a lot in a few minutes. But the Zone is also based upon the idea that eating the rich American diet or eating the high carbohydrate diet raises insulin. And the way you solve the problem is you add protein to your carbohydrates. And the author of the Zone tells you it doesn't matter what kind of protein you add and what kind of carbohydrate you eat. You can eat Pop-Tarts, Snickers bars, doesn't make any difference, just as long as you add that protein in. So I went and looked at the research that supported his beliefs. I wanted to see a study that showed that when you added protein to carbohydrate, you reduced the insulin production in the body. After all, that's the whole theory, the whole basis for his program. I found one study published in The Lancet in 1966. The insulin response from beef was quite low. The insulin response from pure sugar glucose was also low. Now, when they added beef to glucose, as the author tells us to do, the insulin response was tremendously exaggerated. The authors considered it a synergistic response. In other words, the two together really made the insulin go up. 4 times as much as beef alone and twice as much as pure sugar. The whole theory is contradicted by this basic research. Next slide. Now, if you really want to lower insulin, and that's okay, it's not a bad idea. It's just one of those side issues when it comes to eating a good diet and exercising. Just like your cholesterol goes down, your triglycerides go down, your blood sugar goes down. It's a side issue. The important thing, as you well know, is that we're taking a great body and we're properly nourishing it. And then these markers, these signs that we pay so much attention to, like cholesterol and blood pressure and triglycerides and so on, they come back in line. But the real important thing is that the body gets healthy. So let's take a look at what happens when you use a program like the Pritikin program. You're all familiar with the Pritikin program. It's similar to what I recommend if you eat. The Pritikin program is very high in carbohydrate. It's 80% carbohydrate, 10% protein, 10% fat. They looked at patients. These were diabetics, people with insulin resistance, normal, quote, normal people. And they fed them this high carbohydrate diet. They exercised them, and they cut their insulin levels in half. That's how you cut insulin levels. If insulin's your focus, and it shouldn't be, it should be just good health. They also cut the triglycerides in half. They also dropped the cholesterol. People lost weight. They got healthy, which is really the goal. Next slide. There are lots of issues when it comes to food. What happens is diet book authors, what they do is they take one of these components of the whole picture, and they make a whole book out of it. Like glycemic index. I mean, you could find a half a dozen books in the bookshelves talking about glycemic index, which is how much the sugar goes up after you eat a certain food. Yeah, that's one quality of the food. Based on that, they tell you that candy bars are better for you than potatoes. Some people believe that. We have the insulin score that I just showed you. That's another quality of food. There's also something called satiety, which I think is the most important quality of food. If you want to look at what food really means to people, it's the amount of satisfaction that it gives you. And so when we look at the amount of satisfaction a certain food gives you, maybe potatoes will cause a high glycemic index, but potatoes are amongst the most satisfying foods that human beings eat. They're 7 times as satisfying as croissants and twice as satisfying as beef. You've got to look at the whole food, the whole picture. We really don't know the whole picture. We don't. We know a little about glycemic index, a little about insulin response, a little about satiety index, and transient times, and all kinds of things, a little bit. Don't let somebody sell you another diet book based on one of these micro issues. It's the whole food that really counts. Next slide. And we want to talk about the health issues too when it comes to high protein diets. The Surgeon General did a report published in 1988 that looked at the rich American diet, which is a high protein, high fat diet. We all know that. And he came to the conclusion, along with his 350 associated scientists, that the leading cause of death and disability in the United States is the diet that we eat. He said more than 1 million people a year die as a consequence of that diet. More than cigarette smoking, more than auto accidents, more than wars. More than 1 million people a year die as a consequence of the rich Western diet. The 10 leading causes of death: heart disease, cancer, strokes, diabetes, other forms of atherosclerosis. 5 of the 10 leading causes of death, the ones I mentioned, are caused by the rich Western diet. Next slide. And he said, in his report, his conclusion, he said the disproportionate consumption of foods high in fats, often at the expense of foods high in complex carbohydrates and fiber that may be more conducive to health, is the reason people are having these diseases. So here you have the Surgeon General, you have 360 scientists looking over the entire body of the world literature, and they come to the conclusion that carbohydrate is good for you, contrary to what people who preach high protein diets are telling you. They tell you carbohydrate is bad. Carbohydrate turns into sugar. Carbohydrate makes you fat. Carbohydrate raises your insulin levels. Not true, you know that now. The Surgeon General says carbohydrates is good for you. Next slide. The problem is this. The problem is we live in a country where everybody can afford to eat like kings and queens. We have the richest meal plan known to humankind. And as a result, people end up looking and feeling like kings and queens. Throughout history, the way people acted is this. People lived on diets based on starch. Like in Asia, it was rice. In Europe, it was breads until about 400 years ago, they had potatoes. And in Southern Europe, it was pastas. And in South America, it was beans and rice. Indians, it was corn. Now that's what the basic person lived on most of the days of the year. And then what the person did is occasionally they would have festivals. They'd have special occasions, holidays. And they did unordinary things on those days. They'd dance in the street, they'd take the day off work, and they'd eat special food. They'd take a pig and they'd kill it, a valuable pig, and roast it over a fire. Or take a couple of valuable chickens and throw them in the pot of vegetable stew. This was a celebration. Well, most people could only afford to do that once in a while. But there were people in every society who were rich. And they came to the party and they said, oh, this is so much fun. I wish I could do this every day. Well, I can, I'm rich. And so they walked up the hill to the castle and they started partying 3 times a day, 7 days a week, all year long. And do you remember what these aristocrats and kings and queens looked like? Do you remember? They looked like Americans. I can cast you a play for King Henry VIII in 4 minutes on any street corner in Los Angeles or any other town. That's the problem. You see, we've taken rich, which was supposed to be special. We made it every day. We made a holiday every day. When I was a boy, a young man growing up, I started every morning with Easter. I went on to Thanksgiving and Christmas for lunch and dinner, and every night after dinner I had a birthday party. So do all our friends. That's why they're in trouble. So what we've done is we've taken a diet that is known through all human history to fatten and sicken people, and we've exaggerated with the high-protein diets. So the health consequences likewise have to be exaggerated. But because of some of the trickery, people do lose weight. But they get sick too. A lot of your friends, I'm sure, have told you, well, you know, the Atkins diet is a great diet. Not only did I lose weight, but my cholesterol came down, my triglycerides came down, my blood sugar came down. Everything's wonderful. Yeah, I'm constipated. Yeah, I have bad breath, but hey. Yes, all these things came down. Why? Because the person is sick. They don't eat. That's why the things came down. I'll tell you about a great weight loss program. Great, yeah, right. It's called cancer chemotherapy. With cancer chemotherapy, your weight comes down, your cholesterol comes down, your blood sugar comes down, your blood pressure comes down. But would anybody associate cancer chemotherapy with good health? You ought to be thinking in the same terms when somebody does something bizarre, like eats the Atkins diet. Next slide. The diseases caused by the rich Western diet are many, and these diseases are exaggerated when you eat a high-protein diet. The risk is exaggerated. There are things like heart attacks, strokes, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, arthritis, including ankylosing spondylitis, gout, psoriatic rheumatoid, lupus, osteoporosis, kidney stones, kidney failure, multiple sclerosis, all kinds of bowel problems like appendicitis. In Atkins' own research, which hasn't been published, 70% of the people complain of constipation. Colitis, including Crohn's, ulcerative, non-specific, chronic diarrhea, diverticulosis, diverticulitis, gastritis, gallstones, hiatus hernia, hemorrhoids, varicose veins, all kinds of cancers that are associated with the rich Western diet. How could you believe anything but overconsumption of these foods that have been condemned to cause these diseases would make you healthy? How could anybody believe that? They have to make you sicker. Next slide. Let's talk about what are the diseases. That's a household word. You're familiar with heart disease in relation to diet, and cancer we heard about last night in relation to diet. But osteoporosis may be one you're not familiar enough with. And so I'd like to share with you some information about high-protein diets and how they waste your bones away. High-protein diets, in other words, meat we're talking about. Meat is acid. If you take and grind up chicken, any other kind of muscle, beef, fish, etc., you grind it up and you measure its pH level, you'll find it's acid. Hard cheese is the same way, acid. Eggs, seafood of any kind, acid. Whereas if you grind up vegetables and fruits, they're alkaline. When we consume an acid diet, what happens is the body has to buffer that acid. The reason is the body has a pH level, and it happens to be slightly alkaline. It has a pH level that it has to guard. It has to guard precisely because all the chemical reactions in the body depend upon this pH level being precise. So when we eat acid, the body has to buffer the acid. And the primary buffering system of the body is the bones. Especially when we're not eating the fruits and vegetables that would also add buffer. So the cause of osteoporosis in our society, the loss of bone, is the high acid, high animal product diet that we eat. And the lack of fruits and vegetables. Now if that is true, we should see it in the world picture. Next slide. If we take a look at hip fracture rates worldwide, which you see on the left side of the chart, and you compare this with animal protein intake, country by country, you see a straight line progression. The more animal protein consumed worldwide, the higher the incidence of osteoporosis, hip fracture. South African blacks, extremely rare for them to get osteoporosis as long as they stay in South Africa, in the rural countries. Papua New Guinea, these people are essentially vegetarians, have virtually no hip fracture, no osteoporosis. As you increase the animal protein intake, like Hong Kong, Singapore, Israel, and so on, if you increase the animal protein increase, you increase the incidence of hip fractures. Now that's not what we've been taught. What we've been taught is the reason we have weak bones is because we don't consume enough calcium. That's the message out there. So let's take a look at that for a minute. Next slide. If we compare hip fracture rate with calcium intake worldwide, we see a similar straight line correlation. The more calcium consumed worldwide, the more hip fractures. The only way that relationship can exist is if calcium has little or nothing to do with the strength of the bones, and that's what the truth is. That's the scientific truth. That's not the economic truth or maybe personal preference truth. That's the scientific truth. You see, the reason this message, very solid in science, doesn't reach you is because industry doesn't want to tell you the harmful effects of animal protein. They want to just tell you about the positive effects of taking Tums or calcium supplements or drinking milk. It's just business, folks. It's nothing personal. And how about us? How do we feel about this? I mean, do we want to hear the way to protect our bones is to say turkey for Thanksgiving and fish for a special night out? No, we want to hear the way to have strong bones is give me one more slice of pepperoni pizza. Another bowl of ice cream will make those bones strong. You see, we're guilty too. But it's not true. Next slide. If you look at the research that's been done in the late 70s, early 80s, this is all the research, where they took people, they put them in experimental settings, and they fed them various levels of calcium. They fed them low protein diets or high protein diets. What you find is, say, for example, on 500 milligrams of calcium on a low protein diet, which is about 90 grams a day, they're in positive balance. In other words, more calcium stays in the body than leaves the body. On a high protein diet, which is about 140 grams a day, they're in negative balance. Go up to 1,400 milligrams of calcium intake a day, you see the same relationship. Low protein diet, positive balance. High protein diet, negative balance. You could take gallons of glasses of milk. You could take handfuls of calcium pills, and you're going to be in negative balance, negative calcium balance. You'll be urinating your bones into the toilet until you get off that high acid, high protein American diet. Just the way it's always going to be. Now you take that American diet and you exaggerate it. Instead of feeding somebody 140, 160 grams of protein a day, let's feed them all protein, like the Atkins diet. Protein and fat, high protein. Now you're taking 200, 250, 300, 350, maybe 400 grams of protein a day. What would you expect? Next slide. This relationship between protein, animal protein, and bone loss is not anything new. Interesting findings published in the National Geographic in 1987. They found a couple of women who were sitting in their hut, and an ice floe fell on top of them and froze them for 5 centuries. So they autopsied these 2 women, found one to be in her 20s, one to be in her 40s. And at autopsies, they found that they showed signs of severe osteoporosis, and they also suffered from atherosclerosis, in other words, hardening of the arteries. And this, they said this was probably the result of a heavy diet of whale and seal blubber. 500 years ago, people were still suffering the ravages of this high protein diet. And by the way, the closest example of the Atkins diet in a natural living situation is the Eskimo diet. They stayed on the Atkins diet 70% of the year. And in every age group, as published in 1974, in every age group after the age of 40, they have 10 to 15% greater bone loss, the Eskimo does, than the average American in the same age group. Next slide. When you recommend a diet high in animal products, you would recommend a diet that provides more than just the muscle. It also provides a whole bunch of interesting little creatures, microbes. And these microbes are bacteria that you hear about, various kinds of parasites, and also various kinds of viruses, including retroviruses like bovine leukemia, bovine AIDS virus. And of course, there's the issue of mad cow disease, which is spreading worldwide. Now, why would we be particularly concerned about animal products and these infectious agents? Well, for a very simple reason, is that we're animals. You see, our systems are very close to other animals. As a result, these infectious organisms can spread to us and make us sick. Whereas plants are very different than us. And so what infects plants does not threaten us. You have no friends with Dutch elm disease or aphids. It just doesn't happen. There was an article last month in the Annals of Internal Medicine about how sprouts were contaminated with I forget which bacteria. And I read through the article, or not contaminated. The article is how eating sprouts will put you at risk for getting salmonella or some kind of bacteria infection. I'm probably in national headlines. Whenever something like that comes out, it's national headlines. Why? Because nobody wants to eat sprouts, right? People like to hear good news about their bad habits. So. Well, as you search through the article, I knew it was there. I just had to find it. They started listing the source of contamination of the sprouts. The dung from the cows and all kinds of other sources. it has to come from animals, like the Odwalla apple story. Okay, that's because the apples fell off the tree and landed in the cow dung. E. coli won't grow on apples. It's from contamination. And hepatitis A on your strawberries. Strawberries won't grow hepatitis A. It's because somebody made doo-doo on the strawberry. Okay? And the threat is great. There's estimated 6,000 to 10,000 deaths a year due to consuming animal products that are contaminated with organisms that threaten us. Next slide. When we recommend that people eat these high animal protein diets, as we're going to talk about in more detail in a minute, you're also condemning them to contamination from environmental chemicals. Environmental chemicals that are known to cause cancers, are known to cause diseases like Parkinson's disease, other neurologic deficits. These chemicals, I know it's an old story for most of you, but these are chemicals, they end up being sprayed on the grasses and grains. They're consumed by the cow, which concentrates these chemicals in the fat of the cow, and the reason is because these chemicals are fat soluble, so they get sucked up and concentrated 100 or 1,000 times fold in the fat of the cow, and then we eat the cow, which further concentrates these same chemicals in our body fat. Who's the end of the food chain? It's baby suckling mother's breast. So the way you reduce your chemical contamination risk is you eat low on the food chain, very simple, which is exactly the opposite of what's recommended by high protein diets. Next slide. Oh, next slide. I don't want to show you. So notice the difference. I mean, I can show it in this group. Go ahead, go. I mean, that's unappealing, don't you think? It's just amazing. It's by our human nature that we don't like this. It doesn't even have to be this gross. I mean, you think about the fast food restaurant that's serving horse instead of cow when we were growing up. In the hamburgers, wasn't it disgusting? They put kangaroo in your hamburgers. Or you went to France and you found they served horse on the menu. And it really turned your stomach, didn't it? I mean, these things are naturally disgusting. But because we're so familiar with them, and because they dose them heavily with salt and sauces, many people are able to eat them. But if I came to you with a new plant food, say for example, we were just talking about Hawaii, say I came to you with a star fruit that you've never seen a star fruit before. Most of you have. Cut it up, hand it to you, say, how would you like to try this? You say, hey, great, looks good. Why? Because we're naturally attracted to these things. Next slide. Beautiful things. And the things that we're supposed to eat by our natural instincts. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about some of these popular diets that friends are on, okay? Let's talk about the Atkins diet. By the way, I've had a chance to meet most of these folks in person on stage and debates, and had a lot of fun. I had a wonderful time. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the programs and how they work. The Atkins diet, the premise is that hyperinsulinism, which means high insulin in the blood, and insulin resistance are caused by carbohydrates. Now, insulin resistance, you hear about that all the time. Insulin resistance is a protective mechanism. The body is trying to keep it from getting so big it can't fit through a door. What happens is we eat the American diet full of fat, sugar, deficient in fiber. What happens is the body starts getting fat. And the fat cells start to make adaptations so that insulin is less powerful. It becomes resistant to insulin. It has less insulin receptors on the cells of the insulin receptors on the cells. It becomes insulin resistant, so that we just don't continue to balloon at this geometric rate. It's a natural protective mechanism. So what would make sense would be to correct the problem by dealing with the cause, which is the rich Western diet, and get some exercise. And that always cures insulin resistance. As you lose the weight, as you eat more carbohydrate, the body becomes more sensitive to insulin, and the insulin resistance goes away. Okay, so the solution to the Atkins diet is to virtually eliminate all carbohydrate and to develop ketosis. You have to go into ketosis. Now, ketosis is a natural state that occurs. It occurs in two circumstances that I'm aware of. One is when you're sick. When you're sick, you're supposed to be recuperating You're not supposed to be gathering and preparing food, so the body goes into ketosis. Ketosis suppresses the hunger drive, so you can be relieved of that desire to eat, so you can recuperate. The Atkins diet causes you to go into ketosis, which simulates a mechanism that naturally occurs when we get sick, and that's one of the reasons I call the Atkins diet the make yourself sick diet. The other reason is because the Cancer Society and Heart Association declare that the very foods recommended are our leading causes of death and disability in this country. The other circumstance where we go into ketosis is through prolonged starvation. It's a kindness of nature. After 3-4 days of starvation, you go into ketosis, so you starve to death with less pain. You have to be in ketosis for the Atkins diet to work. Atkins tells you that. You must be in ketosis. If you go on the maintenance program and you start to gain weight, you got to go right back into ketosis. And that means you may have to eat less than a half a potato a day. Carbohydrate. Okay, let's look at the published research on the Atkins diet. Next slide. There's been one study published on the Atkins diet. It was published back in 1980 in the American Journal of the American Dietetic Association. There are 2 other studies that he's paid for, which have not been published yet, which I have to have the results of. And that's the one I quoted you in terms of constipation. But this is the only published study on the Atkins diet. Next slide. The published research shows that the cholesterol goes up on the Atkins diet. By the way, you do lose weight on the Atkins diet. The research shows that. The cholesterol goes up. Next slide. Bad cholesterol goes up in a significant amount in women. Next slide. And in the whole group. Good cholesterol goes down. Next slide. Uric acid goes up, which has to do with gout. Triglycerides do go down. Next slide. And free fatty acids go up. Free fatty acids are associated with heart arrhythmias, and the free fatty acid levels almost double on the Atkins diet. Yes, you lose weight, but remember, there are many ways to lose weight. You can catch AIDS and lose weight. You can take chemotherapy or get chronic active hepatitis and lose weight. But making yourself sick to lose weight is not the way you want to accomplish it. And that's the way the Atkins diet works. Next slide. Now, another kind of diet, which is not a make yourself sick diet, it's a diet of trickery. You have make yourself sick diets like the protein power diet and the Atkins diet that put you into ketosis. Well, the diets that fool you, what they do is they develop these complicated mechanisms that the dieters and all. Finally, I found the reason I'm fat. It's not my fault. They've been withholding information from me. Yeah. It's my genes. Or my little hormones or something. You know, it's not me. It's not because I don't want to go for a walk. I like ice cream. Well, this is the one that's fooled most Americans. It's the Zone. It's by Barry Sears. I've met Barry Sears on 3 occasions, 3 debates. And I'll tell you a little bit about them as we go along. I was scheduled for 4 debates, but we only met 3 times. The premise of the Zone diet is that the reason people are fat and sick is because of an imbalance of protein to carbohydrate. It produces excess insulin and bad eicosanoids, which are little tiny hormones in the body, hormones. Okay? The solution is to determine how much protein you need to eat. Okay? There's charts in this book. You determine how much protein you're supposed to eat every day. And then you balance out the rest of the diet so that 30% of your calories are from protein, 30% are from fat, and 40% are from carbohydrate.
Good job. Can we take the extra left, please?
Sorry. How do you know which one you're getting? Okay, sorry. Published results, no published results. All right.
You're awesome.
Next slide. So I met Barry in Las Vegas back about 5 years ago at a health show, and we had an audience of about 4,000 people. And I talked to him about his diet, and I explained to the listening audience how his diet worked. I explained that his diet was a semi-starvation diet, and it was nearly impossible to follow. And to prove that point, next slide, I used my opponent, Barry Sears, as an example. In his book, Barry says that he's 6'5", weighs 210 pounds. and he's been following the zone for 4 to 5 years. That was back 5 years ago. Remember, the diet is 30% protein, 30% fat, 40% carbohydrate. He eats 100 grams of protein a day. Based on his body size, his activity level, based on his charts, he tells us he eats 100 grams of protein a day. Okay, keep these figures in mind. Next slide. So there are 4 calories in every gram of protein. He eats 100 grams of protein a day. Tells us in his book he does that. So that's 400 calories of protein he eats every day. The formula is 30, 30, 40. So if he eats 400 calories of protein, he eats 400 calories of fat and about 500 calories of carbohydrate. So that means his daily intake is 1,300 calories. Next slide. Now remember, Barry's 6'5", weighs 210 pounds. His daily intake is 1,300 calories for the past 4 to 5 years. If Barry sat in a chair and slept, to keep his heart and lungs going would cost about 2,300 calories a day. So that means he's in a deficit of 1,000 calories a day or 7,000 calories a week. Next slide. 1 pound of fat is 3,500 calories. Barry's deficit is 7,000 a week. It means his weekly weight loss is 2 pounds. His yearly loss is 104 pounds per year. And his total loss over 4 to 5 years is 400 to 500 pounds. So I said, there's the math, Barry. Now, I insist you answer the following question. Next slide. Here are the possible conclusions. You started at over 600 pounds. You defy the laws of nature, or you cannot and do not follow your own diet. Now, this hasn't changed. Did not answer. So we went off to Boston for the next debate. 2,000 people, okay? Now, what is Barry going to do? You know, I just embarrassed the hell out of him with some simple math, so he's got to figure some way to get out of this. Well, I know Barry loves olive oil because he talks about it in his book. So I figured he's going to tell us, no, he doesn't eat 1,300 calories a day. He makes it up with good, healthy olive oil. Next slide. So I went out in search of a bottle of olive oil. I found this bottle of olive oil, which represents the difference in calorie intake. He says his diet is 2,300 calories a day, which would mean to make up that extra 1,000 calories, he'd have to add olive oil, which would now make his diet 65% fat, which would mean he'd have to consume 5.5 ounces of olive oil a day. And I handed him the bottle of olive oil and I said, Barry, chug. Let's see you do it, buddy. See, Colin Campbell was there. He was there, he saw it. Where is he? Yeah, it's fun, wasn't it? And then the guy who's changing the slides, right? He's changing the slides and drops my slides on the floor. And I said, and it's time debate. I said, oh, Barry, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I said, why don't we take our shirt off and show what we look like? And Barry went through that. So that's one happened. All right. So we have a debate scheduled in Orlando, and I was told, secondhand information, that Barry told the L show producers that he found no reason he ought to go do this other debate. It didn't do him any good at all. So we didn't meet in Orlando. But then I got an invitation from the World Presidents Organization for the British Virgin Islands to go to debate somebody who was doing a high-protein diet. They asked if I knew anybody that would debate me, and I said, well, you know, probably most people would like to go to the Virgin Islands. All expenses paid. And I said, you know, I've already got it prepared for Barry Sears. I said, he canceled the last time, but maybe he'll accept for this. So they called him and he accepted. So where is Barry going to go now? Okay. Well, I want to tell you, when I debate somebody, I work very hard. I work day and night. I work weekends, because I'm not going to walk in there and make a fool of myself. So I was preparing for this next round, and I figured, what in the heck's this guy going to do? I mean, I'm kind of on every angle. So I happened to get a little brief, or maybe Jeff Nelson sent it to me, I think Jeff did, a little thing about how Barry wrote something about me. He said, McDougall is stupid. You know, if he knew anything about nutrition, he'd know that to live long, you need to restrict your calories. And he was writing his book on the anti-aging zone, right? Okay, the anti-aging zone. So McDougall knows nothing about anti-aging medicine. If he did, he'd know you're supposed to restrict calories. So I thought, okay, Barry's going to get on stage and he's going to tell people, yes, he really does eat 1,300 calories a day because he's trying to stay young. Next slide. That's exactly what he did. And I said, well, Barry, let me tell you a little story. I said, well, I lived in Hawaii. There was this guy who used to go around saying he was a breatharian. That meant he got everything on air. He got water, food, and everything. But one day he was caught sneaking down at 7-Eleven buying candy bars and potato chips. So my question to you, Barry, is it possible you'll become a breatharian? And so I cut up this little paper thing here, and I wrote the title of the San Francisco Chronicle was "Breatharian was caught eating hamburgers and peas." The zone must be an air diet. Because somehow he really, if he was moved around all, would burn 2,700 calories a day. He takes in 1,300 calories. Somehow that man gets 1,400 calories a day from air. I have friends that go on the zone diet. I said, what do you do? Well, I just eat more chicken. I said, what do you count all that? Well, no, that's too hard. I can't count all that stuff. I just know I'm in the zone because I feel good. I feel like I'm in the zone. I love that chicken. Ooh. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we have the carbohydrate addicts diet, and this is by Hellers. All right. This diet says that some people are addicted to carbohydrates, and they release excess insulin, which feeds their compulsion and stores fat. It's always the same thing, this excess insulin stuff. As I showed you, the scientifically incorrect, but they don't care. Okay, the solution, this is a good one. The solution is two low carbohydrate meals. In other words, no potatoes, rice, pasta, just lots of meat. And then your one meal a day is called a reward meal, and you get to eat unrestrictedly and drink without restriction for an hour. You can eat anything and drink any alcohol you want. Hey, what a diet, man! This is great! Published results, none. Okay, so we're in Orlando at the health show, and I'm scheduled to debate him, along with a few other people. Michael Jacobson was there, Center for Science and Public Interest. And we're sitting at the table, and one guy says, hey, do you really mean you can eat 2 low carbohydrate meals a day and eat 1 unrestricted meal for an hour? He says, no, we never said that. He says, I read it in your book, you said it. Well, we never said that. I said, oh boy, this is going to be a great debate. They're going to deny everything I say. So if you read their books in series, they go from this statement in their original book to one where, yes, your unrestricted meal has a little bit of protein, a little vegetables, and a little carbohydrate, and no alcohol. It's changed. Anyway, we're sitting there talking, and the Hellers, by the way, became really famous just recently because they went on the Oprah show, and Oprah started on their diet and got really excited about it. I don't know whether any of you remember that. Yeah. Carbohydrate addicts diet, got really excited about it. So this is about that time, and I said to him, hey, how's Oprah doing? Oh, Oprah's doing pretty good. I said, well, how's her weight loss going? Well, she lost 4 pounds last month. I said, gee, that's interesting. I said, my patients on a high fiber diet lose that with 1 bowel movement. The debate was downhill like that. They hated me. I don't understand why, but they did. Next slide. Okay, we are carbohydrate addicts. I want to promise you, if you are a carbohydrate addict, you have taste buds at the tip of your tongue that demand you eat carbohydrate. Remember what they taught us in high school, college biology, that we have taste buds at the tip of the tongue that taste only 1 calorie-giving substance, that's carbohydrate. That's those sweet tasting taste buds were designed as seekers of carbohydrate. It's all there in our anatomy and physiology. We're as much carbohydrate addicts, though, as we are oxygen addicts and water addicts. Yes, sir, we desire those things too to stay alive. And carbohydrate is crucial to stay alive. and to stay healthy. The whole intestinal tract, as you heard last night, is based on digesting and utilizing carbohydrate. But the human being is a survivor. That's why people get fooled. The human being is the best creation going. I mean, think about it. The human being will survive 2 packs of cigarettes, a half a bottle of whiskey, and grease daily. It lives. So that's why people get fooled. You know, if you took 1 breath of a cigarette and ended up a respirator, nobody would smoke. You know, you took a bite of beef and your chest hurt, nobody would eat beef. But because it takes a while, because the body is such a miracle and what it can resist, people get fooled. Next one. We were at a restaurant recently. I want to straighten this out for you forever, okay? I don't ever want you or any of your friends to be confused about this point. This is something we stress greatly in the tapes to make sure that people can understand enough to never be confused again. Because it's right there. I mean, it's right there, every place for you to see it, the truth is. And I know all of you have already seen it, but you have friends and relatives that have. So Mary and I are at a restaurant in Hawaii, and this lady comes up to us with a camera and says, "Take your picture, $10. I said, "No, thank you. I don't want my picture taken, $10. I said, "I would like those people's picture taken for $10. She went over and she took this nice picture of these people speaking Japanese, okay? And they were first and second generation, and they were eating a very high vegetable meal. And she came back, she sold me the picture, $10. And I said, "Now I would like you to take a picture of that family for me for $10. Next slide. Third and fourth generation. What happened? What happened between the first, second, third, and fourth generation? Did the genetics change? Did some virus come and engulf them? What happened is they now eat less carbohydrate and more protein and more fat. And you can see this all over the world. Next slide. You go to the Far East and you look at people who live on high rice, high vegetable diets, low meat, no dairy product diets. They're trim, healthy, hardy people who avoid the common diseases of Americans. And when these Asians or Africans move to the United States or Western Europe and they decrease their intake of carbohydrate, increase their intake of fat and protein, they get fat and sick. Every place you go, you can see this. You go stand out at the airport for a while, it's obvious. Turn on a travel log, it's obvious. Travel around the world, it's obvious. This is a truth that no one can argue against. They can give you theories about insulin, about eicosanoids, about all kinds of other nonsense. But you ask them, how come people who live on high carbohydrate, high vegetable, high fat food diets, low meat, low dairy, low fat diets, how come they're so trim, so hardy looking, so young looking, so active? And how come when they move to this country they get fat and sick? They can't answer that except by the truth. Next one. What we're interested in is long-term weight loss. And there's something called the National Weight Loss Registry. And what they do is they look at people who've lost weight for over a year, a significant amount of weight for over a year, and that significant amount of weight is more than 30 pounds. They've collected about 3,000 cases of people who've lost more than 30 pounds and kept it off for over a year. Weight losses have been as much as 250 pounds. And what they've found is that the programs that work are low-fat, high-carbohydrate diets. In fact, less than 1% of the people in the registry follow high-protein diets. Less than 1%. Next slide. January 11th of 2001, the Department of Agriculture, after a year-long study, came out with their report. And they said only high-carbohydrate, modest-fat diets work for long-term. The research is solid. This study was the result of the debate that I did in Washington, D.C. in front of the United States Department of Agriculture and television cameras from all over the world. There was a debate with Atkins and Sears and a guy named Mateo from the Sugar Busters. Dean Ornish and I were there. But we debated these folks. It was long, drawn out, and boring. But it created enough interest that the agriculture department was forced to look at the research, scientific research. And after a year of research, nearly a year of research, this is the conclusion they came to. Following that debate, next slide. Next slide. Following that debate came out Newsweek magazine with a story about this particular debate, and Ornish and I appeared with Dr. Atkins in the story. And what you find down here is you find all kinds of pork rinds at the bottom of the story. And if you look closely at the picture, the only unanswered question is Dr. McDougall throwing a pork rind at Dr. Atkins' head. I felt like it, you know. In fact, I tell you what, I really felt like it. Let me tell you. Thanks to my wife, I was probably saved from some embarrassment. You be the judge. I'm preparing for the debate, and I'm going through my slides, and I had only a short presentation I could give. And I said, Mary, you know, I really want to make a statement. I said, I'll tell you what I want to do. When he stands up, I said, he never stood up, he always sat behind the table. I said, when he stands up and says that his diet is effective, easy to do, I'm going to say to him, come on, Chubby, stand up and show us how easy it is to do. She wouldn't let me do it. She said, that's too negative. But you look at him. You look at him. He never budged above that tabletop for a darn good reason. And most of the folks out there that talk to you about how to be trim and healthy with their diets, you take a good look at it. The Atkins diet is effective and easy to follow. He wouldn't be 60 pounds overweight. Thank you very much.